Hey, I'm Nicole. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to a new 3-part video series all about creative sewing. In this video series, I'm going to be sharing with you some techniques along with some ideas and inspiration for how you can level up the creativity in your sewing. These are specific ideas and techniques that I utilize in my own sewing projects that take them from just average to spectacular. Today, we're going to be talking about sewing with trims. If you are already familiar with me and my sewing, you'll know that a huge signature of mine is incorporating trimmings and embellishments into my creative projects. Even before I got back into sewing in earnest, when I was a full-time jewelry designer, I used to spend so much time in haberdasheries sourcing trims, from feathers to pom-poms to braids to fringing. Any manner of haberdashery items were just my absolute go-to. And now I actually have a huge stash of trimmings in those tubs behind me. It's something I love to incorporate in my jewelry work, but it's also something I love to incorporate even more into my sewing. For me, it's just one of the quickest and easiest ways to add extra flair and flamboyancy to your garments, and also to add color and texture. And the beauty is that the variety of trimmings that you can get online and in markets all over the world is second to none. You're absolutely spoiled for choice. So whatever your taste is, whatever your color palette is, you are bound to find loads of trimmings that will suit your taste and style. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you specific ideas for how I have incorporated trimmings and embellishments into my sewing, along with a few of my top tips and techniques for how to handle and work with them. Let's start by having a look at a few examples of different ways I've incorporated trims and embellishments into my sewing. Whenever I go to fabric stores or haberdasheries, I'm always on the lookout for trims. That could be anything from fringing to tassel trims, pom-poms, ribbons, braids, rickrack braids, sometimes cords, sequins. Whenever I come across a trim that I like, I usually buy a couple of meters of it just to keep in my stash, and it almost always comes in handy for some upcoming project or other. I hope you can get a sense from this as to what a difference it makes when you start adding a few little well-placed trims and embellishments on your garments. Now I'm going to show you 3 different ways that you can use and attach trims when you are sewing. Each will have a slightly different benefit and a slightly different application. So the first method involves enclosing the trim within a seam. So what we're going to do is lay our pattern pieces in the traditional way, so they're going to be right sides together. We are going to sandwich the trim, and in this case we are going to use this tassel trim, and we're going to encase that in between the 2 pattern pieces. We want to make sure that when we sew the seam and we turn it back, that the trim is going to be facing the right way that we want to. If it helps you, you could attach the trim onto one side first and then lay the other pattern piece right sides together and sew along the same line. For expediency here, I'm just going to align and stitch all in one go. Now you can see when I turn the garment to the right side, the effect of that is to have 2 layers. So maybe that's a side seam, perhaps it's a sleeve seam, and the trim will be sandwiched in between that seam. So this is quite a good method for anywhere where you want to add the trim in between and inside of the seam. The second method I'm going to show you involves placing the trim on the outside of the garment so the entire trim is visible. For this, you have 2 options. You can either sew your seam right sides together in the traditional way and finish it off on the inside in your preferred method, and then once you've pressed the seam open, you can stitch your trim directly on top of the seam. The other method, which is the one I've been using more recently, does the dual purpose of attaching the trim on the outside, but also concealing the raw edges. So let me show you how that one works. What we're going to do first is attach our 2 pattern pieces, and we're going to do that with wrong sides together, so that the raw edges are on the right side of the garment. What we have here now is our raw edges on the right side of the garment. The next stage here is to press the seam open. So go ahead and take that to your ironing board and press the seam open. If your seam allowance is bigger combined than the width of the trim or the stitchable width of the trim, go ahead and trim down your seam allowance so that all the raw edges will fit neatly underneath the width of your trim. Next, we are going to place our trim on top of that seam, making sure that all the raw edges of the seam allowance here are hidden and encased underneath the trim. You will most likely want to match your top thread with the color of the trim and your bottom thread with the color of your fabric. For this example, I'm just using a white thread, but you'll probably want to match it just to make it more invisible. So you can see here that you've got your trim attached to the outside of the right side of your fabric, and you've got a nice, neat, finished seam on the inside. The final method I'd like to show you is quite a cool one actually. It allows you to add a trim to the hem or the sleeve of a garment without having to actually hem the sleeve or the garment. So here's how that one works. Let's say this is my raw edge of my sleeve hem or my garment hem. This is the right side. What we're going to do is attach our trim with right sides together to the hem of the garment or the sleeve. The thing we want to make sure of here is that the edge of the trim is either the same length or it's slightly overlapping over the raw edge of the fabric. That's because when we turn it under like this, we want the trim to be covering all of the raw edge of the fabric. You can always trim down the fabric later if you end up not achieving that. But while we're sewing, we're going to try and make sure that the end of the trim covers the raw edge of the fabric. Now what we have here, when we turn the trim over to the wrong side, is we have the trim lying against the hem of the garment or the hem of the sleeve, and it also does the dual purpose of hiding that raw seam allowance here on the edge of the garment or the sleeve. If you prefer a more seamless finish, you could hand stitch the trim down onto the back side of the fabric, or you could also run just a parallel row of stitching just to hold that trim in place. So that's what your hem looks like from the front, and that's what it looks like from the back. Well, that's it. I hope you found that useful, and I hope it gave you lots of ideas and inspiration that you can use to elevate the creativity in your next sewing project. If you've not yet experimented with incorporating some trims and embellishments into your sewing, a whole new universe awaits you, I promise. It's going to open up a whole realm of new creative possibilities for you. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a quick thumbs up, drop me a comment to let me know, and subscribe so that you don't miss out on the next 2 videos in my creative sewing series. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.